And welcome everyone to Rock M Radio. This is the beginning of a brand new episode of Dive Cuts. We are live on YouTube for Rock M Plus subscribers at season 8. We're here to talk about your Missouri basketball Tigers. It's the only podcast strictly talking about Mizzou basketball. I'm your host, Sam Stilling. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can see me on the left-hand side. Please take a moment to hit the like button. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so we can help this channel grow a bit. Back once again with the white vans. Here he is. Nothing like 15-year-old memes to get your introduction there. Matt Harris, back from the dead. How are you?
I'm finding the white vans kid is apparently in college, so good for him. Matriculating from high school into higher education. Good for that kid. I'm fine. I'm healthy this week, and unlike last week, it's not my wife's birthday, so I am not out getting a very nice meal. Not that was a bad thing, though. The Italian place we went to was fantastic, but I'm back, and we have good news to talk about this week. You all had to talk about 2 losses. I didn't have to talk about 2 losses, so that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, we spent a little time sort of lamenting what could have been on an 0-2 week. But I think the general takeaways for the 0-2 week is that like Missouri is legitimately a good basketball team that just went up against like a 1 seed and a 2 seed right now, and it's just like, okay, like yeah, like that's gonna happen. And losing close games at that. Turn around and you're taking on 2 teams that are projected to be in the field. No thanks to Missouri for what they did to both Oklahoma and to
the odds are a little bit
Georgia.
Steeper after this week.
Gets a little tougher for those guys now, but but that is actually like one of the things that I did want to talk about. Maybe we could even start here before we get into too much Mizzou. Is actually kind of talking about how the SEC is doing a little bit of eating its own in like all of this the NCAA tournament. Like the league is strong. Everybody knows the league is strong. There's 14 teams that feel like they could be NCAA tournament teams. Feel like they had the non-conference resume to kind of build that. And even LSU and South Carolina had their moments in the non-con. So going into league play, like we kind of knew that LSU and South Carolina were probably going to fall off. Really what it became is like, what are those like bottom 5, 6 teams in the league going to do? Fortunately for Missouri, they're not in that group. But it's become really, really difficult for these bottom teams, Oklahoma and Georgia, 2 teams that Missouri beat. On top of that, you have Arkansas and Texas. And if you want to include Vanderbilt there as well, they took they were very competitive, held the lead for a very long time in Knoxville and just sort of slipped up down the stretch and couldn't quite pull it off. Like these are all teams that like they need wins. And if you're trying to get into the NCAA tournament, like Oklahoma going into the game at Missouri was still like a lot of teams didn't, like a lot of brackets didn't even have them in the last 4 out. And then they
were solidly in.
And then they took a 24-point drubbing at Missouri. They went back home to face LSU and coughed up a 5-point lead and lost in less than 30 seconds to play to LSU. Something that like if you're trying to make the tournament, you have to win that game, and they didn't win that game. And so I'm wondering if the top of the league has turned out to be so good that it's going to end up hurting the league overall as far as getting, that record-setting number of teams in the NCAA tournament.
I was actually looking at this the other day, and I'm looking at it again now. Back in 2011, the Big East put 11 teams in, and they had 5 left on the stoop. And I was looking at the teams that got left out, and Seton Hall was 7-11 in that Big East, but they were 13-18 overall. Um, Rutgers was 5-13, but 15-17. Providence was 4-14, 15-17. We're probably going to have something close to that with LSU and South Carolina. So, I mean, we're going to have two teams that are going to legitimately struggle, and both those teams coming out of non-con, didn't have the greatest resumes coming out of non-con. I mean, South Carolina had beaten Clemson, and LSU's best win coming out of non-con was probably Kansas State. That has aged better in recent weeks, but it wasn't like these were teams where if you looked at like the SEC's resume, of quality wins, those teams were high up there, and they had some struggles in other games against median teams. I think South Carolina lost an opening night to Charleston Southern, so we weren't really surprised those two teams kind of, finished where they did. I think the question was always how much stock could you put in, Oklahoma's 3 quad 1 wins? How much stock could you really put in Arkansas, really not having a good non-con whatsoever? Arkansas biffed its opportunities aside from the Michigan game on a neutral floor. Texas didn't have a great non-con in terms of quality win situations. And so I think for me, I look at less as the league cannibalizing itself and more as the teams that are sort of in these binds right now. I think in a lot of ways are kind of like remora fish, just kind of like surviving off the reputation of the rest of the conference. And when they got into league play, the things that had been issues for them in non-con have manifested because there's no reprieve now. There's not, a sub 300 team that Texas can use to hide out against. There's not Arkansas can't just sort of like grit and get through against number 225 team. So to me, I think the question has always been like, what's the relative quality of the conference? I've always thought, if you just watch the teams play basketball, to me, there's always been just 10 or 11 like quality teams. And then there have been 2 or 3 where I've been like, I think you're kind of leeching off.
Yeah, you got to get to 68 kind of teams.
Right. And so it's like hard for me to like sit here and be like, oh man, what are we going to do? Like a great team in Georgia's going to be probably what, 3-10 against quad ones? Mm-hmm. Like the question here wasn't opportunities, so that's where I get down to is it's hard for me to really be like, oh man, the SEC's cannibalizing itself, other than there were 11 really good teams in this league and about 3 or 4 that were probably NIT teams that have gotten some boosts because they're playing in the same league this year. And that's
and Oklahoma is like a particularly like interesting because they like their non-conference schedule was really pretty bad outside of their MTE. And then they had the neutral site matchup, which is a Jordan Brand thing, I think, where they beat Michigan. So they had the really good win, the Michigan win. Me, I still have questions at times on how good Michigan actually is. Danny Wolf looks great. Sometimes the rest of that roster is like, woof, what are they doing? But yeah, beating Arizona at a time when Arizona was kind of figuring it out. Arizona has since kind of figured it out. And then Louisville, a team that was completely rebuilt in the offseason is still kind of trying to figure out who they are. And they've also kind of figured it out. So getting those teams early and getting Michigan, clipping Michigan, it's like it's a great thing for Oklahoma to be able to like point to like those 3 teams' success in league play now and say, well, like it just hasn't translated to the SEC, but all through that, like we're you're looking at them and like they're winning games, but they're beating a lot of bad teams, and again, like going back, like beating some teams that aren't quite settled, and I think like that's kind of defined who Oklahoma is, and so like I'm still a believer. Like I think Porter Moser is a really good basketball coach. I think Oklahoma at some point has to decide if they're actually going to care about basketball. They don't particularly seem to care about basketball. They haven't really invested in that program the way that the rest of the SEC has. And this is kind of a league that's been pouring money into their basketball programs now for the better part of 10 years. And while all the established SEC teams are seeing that play out, yeah, you're seeing Oklahoma and even like Texas a little bit to like come to the reality. It's just like this is different now.
Yeah, this is what I would say to people is to go look at the game scores from Oklahoma specifically and look at what they did in their soft part of the schedule. Against Northwestern State, a 59, Stetson, a 61, East Texas A&M, a 75, um, Alcorn State, a 57, Central Arkansas, 62, Prairie View A&M, 59. This was not OU going out and pasting the softies on their schedule. They got some late game leverage situations that they took advantage of, and credit to them, you got to execute, and they got quality wins out of it. But if you were looking at just how Oklahoma played all through non-con, you had real questions about like, all right, they've shown up in big games, but they've looked kind of mediocre against everybody else. And if you look at the statistical profile, there were some underlying things in the metric that made you go, all right, like the PMs are going to look good here, but like when you watch them play, and it's sort of the same thing that
Michigan shot 4 of 28 from 3-point range.
Right. Like if you go look
14%.
And it's sort of the same thing with Texas. Like, so I think this is a long way of us saying the teams that are on the bubble now are teams that if you watched closely and not just like the marquee games. So if you were watching, if you were watching like St. Joe's, Texas in an MTE and you were like, man, Texas doesn't look great right now, which they didn't, you know, you would sort of get out of that and you'd come into the conference play and everyone was saying, oh my God, the SEC's a beast. I think to us who watched like the sickos who watched those non-con games, we're going, yeah, there's like 10 or 11 really good teams, and then 3 or 4 that we'll see. And that's kind of what's happened. The one team I think that we can sort of, pound the lectern about being early on was Vandy. And we weren't saying that Vandy was going to be a team that was going to go 10-8, 11-7. We were saying if Vandy went 8-10, 9-9, it was going to be a banner year for them, and they're tracking towards that. So like, if you're going to ask me one team that I feel like we were early on and that we nailed correctly in that group, it was Vandy being better than people thought. But everyone else has sort of been, I think we even had skepticism about Arkansas. I don't think we had Arkansas at 4-8 Arkansas, but I think there were some questions you could have asked about the Hogs coming in and how they structured that roster. And we'll talk about them a little later, but I just look up and down and I look at the teams that are supposedly slipping off the bubble, and we had questions about them in preseason. We had questions about them when we watched them in bye games. Those doubts have sort of come home when you've seen them against real quality night in and night out. And that's what this league will do. And I think that's what makes this league particularly great is there is no quarter. Like Georgia can't say, oh, you got to put us in. We played in a tough league. My response would be you won 2 quad 1 games despite all these opportunities. You don't get to use the rest of the SEC's accomplishments to burnish your own failing. So I think that's sort of the nice thing is it's such a tough league that if people really don't get quality wins here, there's no excuse. They shouldn't get to say, it was tough and that was a grind. Win basketball games. Win basketball games, get in the tournament. And, that's how we should decide things.
Well, yeah, and like I think to Missouri's credit, like that's one of the things they've done is when the opportunities are presented to them, they go out and they play. They're 8-4.
Yep.
I like we should turn a little bit of attention to like the games that just occurred against Oklahoma. You knew coming in that was a game that I think the expected margin was like 8 or 9. If I remember correctly.
It was 7. It was about 6 or 7, yeah.
I mean, the way that the two teams were playing, though, like it felt like this should be a double-digit win. I expected them to win. I didn't expect them to win by like 20 plus, but I expected it to probably be in the same sort of area as what they did against LSU. To basically be able to kind of expand your lead, get out ahead, and just sort of hold them off, for a period of time, and they just did that, and more. I mean, they separated and didn't really let them back in the game. And when you're especially when you're at home and you're facing a team that's a little shaky like Oklahoma, that's exactly what you need to do.
Yeah. The average projected margin was 8.5. They beat it by 15.5 points. Like that was, and I think when I wrote in lineup performance was, it's sort of telling that we're disappointed that it was sort of a drawn out 24-point win. Like there wasn't like a 2-minute just kill shot where Missouri put them down. It was the first 10-0 run they went on, lasted like 5 minutes. It was not like a thing of, it was not a mercy killing. It was kind of a torture session there for everyone watching that in terms of flow. And then they got a little run at the end of the first half, and then they kind of like didn't really seem engaged coming out of the locker room. It was just, I think it was frustrating if you were watching because it felt like, all right, it should probably be closer to 20 or 30. And we said that against, Arkansas. We said that against LSU, and it's probably something we should note.
It's another high major team they're playing too. Like that's like,
you're right.
I mean, like Oklahoma's not a great team, but they've got high major basketball players. They've got a potential NBA lottery pick.
But this is the thing. Like I went back and looked at it. If you look at the margins here, they beat the margins by almost 40 points in those games combined. Like that's not nothing. So when you're sitting out here and you're watching the game and you're feeling frustrated, it's natural because that's just how things go, in terms of game flow. But you sit back and you look at what the PM say, and you look at what the forecaster margins say, and you're like, my God, they're basically doubling and tripling the margin. That's what good teams do to weak teams that come into their building. It may not be like decisive and as swift as you want it to be, but garbage time in all of those games got there with like between 9 and 12 minutes left, which is impressive, which is what you want to see. So I think that was sort of the thing with the OU game was they came out. It wasn't maybe as clean and pristine as we wanted, turnovers, some rebounding issues early, but ultimately their depth and the quality of just guarding every possession down and grinding out some things on offense got them separation. They got to win. That's exactly and precisely what you want to do. Especially in February when you're just trying to grind results out. That and I think we underrate that. This is the time of the year. You played in college, you probably have a better understanding of it. This is when your body starts to feel things, and your guys are maybe going a little bit lighter in practice. You'll hear coaches say, "Oh, so and so isn't practice very much because it's kind of banged up." It's that time of year where you're not quite gigged up for the tournament, but it's not November anymore, so you're feeling things a little bit. The routines are sort of getting a little bit stale. So to come out and to kind of make a 24-point drubbing look a little boring is a positive sign as to where this team psyche is at.
Yeah, and then they travel to Athens, which has been a place where Georgia has been very competitive. They
fight their asses off at home.
Yeah, they nearly beat Auburn. They really, I thought, had Mississippi State on the ropes.
Yeah, I thought they had
them. Probably should have won that game.
Yeah.
Like they beat the hell out of LSU. They easily beat South Carolina. South Carolina hasn't been great on the road, but still they've been like a pluckier team despite all the losses. Almost feel a little bad. They beat Kentucky at home, beat Oklahoma at home. So this is a team that they protected their home court up until they faced Missouri, and Missouri, I thought the second half was going to be a lot like the first half, but Missouri was probably going to get like a 6 or 8 point lead at some point and just sort of ride that out.
Sit on it. Yeah.
I don't know that I quite saw a combination of runs that ended up being 30-4. Was the total of 2 separate runs in a period.
Yeah.
Like right out of 3 or 4 minutes into the second half, all the way to about the 10-minute mark, and like they just put them away. It was not a contest after that.
I thought Missouri did a nice job kind of stripping the offense down and just kind of playing direct, which I think, to me, that's when they're playing a team that wants to be physical or wants to sort of use their size and athleticism. Sometimes I think the Princeton stuff, I get why you run it because it's hard to scout. it's read-based stuff. You can kind of read how the defense is playing. But some of that stuff can take a little bit of time to unfold. And you can do what Texas A&M did. You can jam, screens. You can pre-switch. You can kind of throw some wrench in things. When Missouri comes down and they just run, an away screen to high pick and roll, or they just come down and run 5 out, or they just throw the ball to Mark at the elbow to start a possession and they just go. Sometimes I think that's pretty good because the defense can't load up to the play side. They can't get matched. Missouri's going a little bit faster. I just think it helps them in terms of aggressiveness defensively. And we can talk a little bit about what Mike White said after the game, because I thought he had some perceptive things. I have questions about Mike White's results that he generates, but he had some perceptive things to say. I thought Missouri won.
Yeah, I think we can be like critical of White and his results, but I do think he's a smart, he's a basketball knower. He just hasn't put it together.
Yeah. One, I think Missouri kind of moved the pickup point further up the floor. They kind of began to extend that way. And I think sometimes I do agree with people who say, if you move the pickup point, that gets your guys more engaged and more locked in defensively, because you don't just settle in. You're not waiting for the ball to be brought up. You're applying pressure early. I thought, mercifully, Missouri didn't zone again. Thank God they didn't zone.
The zone wasn't working this game.
I get why they zone, because you bump the wings out, you push the offense out. Maybe you're going to force some guys to shoot longer shots. But
early in the zone, it was kind of working because Georgia did kind of just settle for some jumpers, and that that's definitely a team you want settling for jumpers. They're not a good.
But then they started flashing RJ and the bigs to the nail.
They're like, wait, settle down, get the ball to the free throw line.
That can confidently pass to each other. So let's just throw it to the two big dudes and have them play 2v1 and just dump to the short corner.
Yeah.
I didn't like the default switching, why they kept default switching for 24 minutes, I don't know. Because
especially when you're bearing and Missouri's good.
Tony's a strong dude,
but you're bearing him against Asa Newell, who's again you're going up against a lottery pick of a power forward, a guy who is going to play in the NBA because he's a big, strong, athletic guy.
And you can throw high-low entries to him because he's got good hands.
Yeah.
So it was just I didn't understand the scout to be like, why are you letting two bigs catch at spots they like to catch? That doesn't make sense to me. I thought Missouri did the right thing where they began to blitz pick and rolls. That began to push the dogs out a little bit. That made their bigs have to play in short rolls. I can see why Mike thought they made some good decisions. They did some good job spraying the ball to shooters, but I generally thought they didn't like catching out around the restricted area, and I don't think they liked the fact that they now had to have, another 10 feet to throw a lob entry pass to the post.
Yeah.
Missouri did something really smart.
That was the bigger thing, is they did a much better job making sure that catch was happening at the top of the key instead of right at the free throw line where, I think Godfrey had at least a couple where he was right at the elbow, and it's just
right the SEC logo on some of them.
Yeah, you're like that's easy pitch and catch for for two big guys like that.
Just throw it to the rim, and the guy's going to go catch and get it. So I thought that was smart by Missouri. They got some live ball turnovers out of it. I thought Ant was really, really good this game about knowing when to gamble. Gambling for bounce passes instead of going for something in the air. He didn't try and turn dribblers over aggressively. So I thought the tweaks they made defensively were really important because they were getting early clock drives by stripping the offense down. They started to get in transition a little bit. UGA couldn't come down and get a bucket to sort of settle things. And I thought Mike White, what he was basically implying was our guys didn't handle that well. Our guys, once Missouri started getting up and running, we couldn't get stops. We couldn't secure boards. And I think a lot of that was they couldn't get that because Missouri was getting secondary breaks. They were getting transition opportunities. And Georgia's good defensively when they get settled, but when they can't get back and get set, they're like any team. They're going to struggle in transition. So I thought Missouri did a good job with the defensive tweaks, even if they didn't always produce stops. I think I wrote this when I posted it on site. They did a good job changing the shot composition and changing how Georgia had to set up offensively. And once Georgia, you and I talked about it, privately, is once you get Georgia unsettled offensively, they don't have kind of core competence across that rotation to really make things happen. So I thought it was a smart tweak by them to sort of say, all right, let's just see if we can push the offense out, make these bigs have to make some decisions farther from the basket. And once that happened and Missouri started to get running in transition, it just snowballed. And I don't think UGA had the mental sort of fortitude to really muster a response. And once it got out of hand, that's when the second run almost felt like all right, here we go again. I thought the first run was probably the more impressive one because they had to change the game flow to get that going. The second one, they'd already broken UGA a little bit.
Yeah, they're 2-8 in their last 10 games. Like losing by some decent margins, in that stretch. Tennessee put them down, Florida put them down, Alabama put them down, Texas A&M put them down, and now Missouri. So, like you talk about the grind of the year, like that's another thing, that kind of happens at this point for teams that have kind of caught some losing streaks, and why it's important to get off the mat. If you've lost a couple games in a row and find a way to win before it turns into a streak, because and it's just human nature. Like you're just going to reach a point where, okay, like we're down 10 with 10 to go again. We're down 12 with 8 minutes to play.
Again,
it's just like
we saw it last year
whether or not you're good on offense or not. Like, if you can make that up. Georgia knows that they don't shoot the three well. Like, they know where their, where their bread is buttered offensively, and it's not playing catch up. Like, if they're going to beat the teams at the top of the league, it has to be, low possessions. It has to be, like grinded out on both sides, and then you kind of hope for the best, and they just haven't been able to do that. Fortunately for Missouri, they were able to kind of get out of there and look good doing it. Again, in one of those games where the projected margin was a single possession, Missouri turned it in. I mean, it was like it very easily could have been a 19-point win.
Yeah.
And they bled a little bit, down the stretch. I was kind of chuckling on my rewatch. I remember thinking at the same time at the end of the game, Blue Cane, like hounding Marquez Warwick at the end of the game, like coming up the court. And I'm just like, what are we doing, man? Come on. Like, we're going to dribble the clock out. Just let it be. And he's like, yeah, chasing the ball around. It's like, all right, Blue Cane. Well, let's turn our attention ahead. Because there's a big game on the horizon. And that is a team who was just in what was sort of dubbed as the game of the year, and turned into a decent game, but a little disappointing performance for Alabama. Alabama was coming off losing their home contest to Auburn. Auburn has asserted itself as the best team in the SEC. Alabama is still really good. They're sixth in KenPom. I think they're still top 5 in the AP poll. And they're coming to Mizzou Arena. KenPom has this as a 1-point Missouri win. Matt, does Missouri have a chance to beat the mighty Crimson Tide?
I like this matchup. I like it.
Oh, you like the matchup against Florida?
I thought there was hope against Tennessee. I like this matchup because Alabama does not want to play the way Texas A&M wants to play, does not want to even play the way Tennessee wants to play, doesn't want to play the way Georgia wants to play. They want it to be free-flowing. They want it to be up and down. Defensively, they play a pack line. They play a pack line. They don't try and apply ball pressure. They don't try and take you out of your comfort zone defensively. They try and keep you in front and use athleticism and length to force guarded shots, get the misses, and they want to get the misses so they can push on a secondary break. That's how Alabama wants to play. They don't want to club you to death in the half court. And I think for Missouri, that's probably a good thing because I think Missouri's played Alabama tough in all 3 games that Dennis Gates has been here. What do we think has been the separator for them? In the first game they played in Columbia, they got a shooting variance. Alabama shot the ball incredibly poorly. Missouri didn't make shots that day. Missouri's shooting equal to Bama right now. They're basically shooting the same percentage from three as Alabama. SEC tournament, Missouri makes that game close. They get some shot making, but what's the difference? Missouri doesn't have the size or athleticism to finish around the rim or get on the glass. Missouri's now, if you look at average height rankings in KenPom, basically the same size as Alabama across the board. You look last year in Tuscaloosa, Missouri didn't have kind of the individual depth that Alabama did to get a Rylan Griffin going on a run. Missouri's got the depth this year. I think I joked with you all. It felt like in a lot of ways, and this is me projecting on behalf of the staff, this roster was built to counter Alabama. It has the positional size, it has the length, it has the shooting, and it has the ability to hang around on the glass. And if you can do that against Bama, you can negate a lot of what Nate Oates wants to do. Nate Oates wants to win the possession math. He wants to play fast so he can get a lot of possessions. He doesn't want turnovers. He wants rebounds to push on secondary break. Missouri is fantastic. Missouri's good on the offensive glass. Bama's a little bit weak on the defensive glass. So if Missouri can rebound, you cut a very important supply line for those secondary breaks that Bama needs to get rolling. That's how they get their runs going. They hit you in early clock off misses. Missouri shoots the ball more consistently than Alabama does. Alabama this year, if you were to look at games where Alabama has shot better than 40% from deep, it's happened 5 times. They are, right now, the value of their three-point attempts off the catch is 196th nationally. It's average. Alabama is a high-volume team. If they cannot get the possessions they need, they cannot get the three-point volume they need, and that negates kind of the advantage that they have from shooting so many three balls. And, I think the other difference here, too, is Missouri has the ability to match up with them 1 through 5. I think that they can put Josh Gray on Clifford Omoruyi, and they can kind of have those two bang. But you go look at guys like Mark Sears and even Grant Nelson. They can throw multiple defenders at Sears. They've got enough depth at the 4 to counter Grant Nelson. There's some ways this works because stylistically Bama doesn't want to make it a meat grinder. And Missouri can do things in very important ways to make the possession math really tight for Alabama. And if it gets there, I like Missouri's odds of having enough diversity across its scoring group to get it done. So that's me being an optimist there, Sam. What do you think about that? What do you think about that?
Well, I always look at it like this is a team that, and I'm talking about Missouri, that has, for the most part, played pretty great at home. They've shot pretty well at home, and they do have the depth and they do have the athleticism. They do have the length that they can bother a lot of what Alabama wants to do. You're right when it comes to Nate Oates. Like Nate Oates and his Alabama team, pretty much every game they step on the floor, they know that statistically they're already kind of 6 or 8 points ahead because that's the style of which they play. They haven't shot the ball as well this year. They're relying on, and I think a lot of that probably comes down to, Mark Sears has not been as consistent as he was last year. That's a big part of it.
They don't have a Rylan Griffin on the roster to sort of give him some extra shooting.
Yeah, and they don't they really their best. That's why I'm looking at 24. I'm like, their 3-point percentage is better than I thought. No, they're 171 in the country. Shears is shooting 34%. Grant Nelson is shooting 26%. Like, still capable of making. Like, he's a better shooter than like Mark Mitchell. Despite the percentages kind of being similar. But LeBaron Philon's at 28. I think, the guy that you really want to focus on is, Aiden Holloway he's
playing better
shooter. And Chris Youngblood is a guy who can knock down shots. But
they're lower usage guys. They're like 17, 18% usage. They're not getting the volume of touches that a Rylan Griffin was getting last year to bomb away.
Right. And so, I think the thing about Alabama for me is going into this season, there is a lot of hype around them because they made the Final Four last year. And a lot of people kind of forgot that, like, they were not great defensively all year long. Like, they struggled defensively. And you see a lot. They've been better this year. And some of that comes down to the fact that they have, Cliff Omarui, like, protecting the rim instead of Grant Nelson. So it's like when you're funneling drivers in a guy like that, it can affect shots. That does help. But they're still not where they were a couple years ago on the defensive end and able to, like, be that disruptive. I'm hesitant to say that I expect Missouri to win this game. But I do think this is a toss-up, and I think it's going to come down to the fact, like, I mean, is somebody going to get loose for the Tigers? That is Caleb Grill or Tamar Bates or one of these guys have seemingly shown up game after game and put Missouri in this place. Are they going to show up and really get what I think at this point, really it would be Missouri's best win, right? Because even like Kansas
Florida.
is
I think Florida on the road.
Florida. Florida's higher and a road win. Okay, second best win. I mean, we've seen because we have seen, like, Kansas not taking anything away from that win, they've slipped. Like, I think they're like 500 in, like, their last six or eight games or something like that. They're losing on the road at Utah. Bill Self's got some problems.
Bill needs to go back to developing high school kids. Go back to doing what works so well for you, Bill. Develop that.
I'm completely okay if Bill wants to, waste his time more in the portal and take more guys that aren't going to help him. Win the way he expects to win there. That's fine. But yeah, you're right. So Florida, but still, like, this is going to be a quad 1A type game, no matter what happens down the stretch, because Alabama is still going to be competitive and win a lot of games down the stretch. I just think it's a really, really good opportunity for Missouri to really kind of set the tone, because I think there's been a lot of focus on the league. There's a lot of focus on Auburn, a lot of focus on Alabama, and now Florida is kind of in that group. Tennessee always gets credit. If Missouri, and I think, like, look, we know what the stats say since, like, January 1st. Missouri's a top 10 team. We know these things. Like, I've written about them. You've written about them. We're aware of how quality of a team Missouri has been since the start of SEC play. But there's still, like, a hesitancy for a lot of people outside of, Missouri writers like we are, to sort of anoint them kind of in the same league as these other teams. And the reason is they have one win out of that against the top group. At some point, like, you've got to beat those teams. And another point that I would bring up is, we've talked about like the recruitment of Davion Hannah and how, like, a lot of these guys kind of get placed and they look for situations and
that's LeBaron Philon too.
So but essentially, like, when you're when you're recruiting against Alabama, the best way to give yourself a better shot is to beat Alabama, and Missouri hasn't done that. And here's an opportunity. Like, if you want to start, like, winning off the floor as well as what you're doing on the floor, like, you have to win games like this to sort of take that next step. And I think, as well as Missouri has played, this is the game that they need to win, especially because they lost to Tennessee and Texas A&M. If they'd have gone 1-1, I'd feel a little bit more like. And look, I'm not talking about, like, I don't think that they're not at risk missing the NCAA tournament.
Watkins and I have them locked. They're in the tournament. This is perfunctory stuff down the stretch. They're in the tournament, people. They're in.
Yeah, and so, but I think what we're talking about is, like, what do we want to accomplish by the end of the year? If what you want to accomplish is a protected seed in the NCAA tournament, potentially a 4 seed in the SEC tournament, to get that double bye, all that kind of stuff. Like all of that is valuable, but you have to start here, man. Like this is the kind of game that you really need to win. If like they can beat Arkansas, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma, Kentucky all down the stretch, but you would still be sitting there with only the one Florida win as like the really big standout.
Right, and you can kind of feel the tenor of the conversation change going into that Tennessee game, where it was like, all right, if Missouri gets this one, we have to talk about them differently. And I don't think people came out of that loss saying, oh man, this was a fraud alert for Missouri. I think people were like, oh, they're having a really good season, and they're really doing better than we expected, but we don't have to talk about them as a contender.
But like the Gary Parrish or Matt Norlanders, like those kinds of guys, they're going to reference what Missouri did as opposed to spend 10 minutes on a podcast talking about it.
Right. They beat Bama. It will send a message, mostly because they will. One, it's a team that everyone had the preseason number 1 next to their name, or preseason number 2. I think it was either them or Kansas. So it automatically counters a narrative. Hey, this team that went 0-18 beat a team that we had anointed as one of the leading national title contenders. It'll change the conversation around them. I think to me the biggest difference is, what have we talked about? What Missouri needs to do? They need to beat the teams behind them. When they've been healthy, and I say that because you can't be able to say you're waving away 0-18. I'm contextualizing 0-18. When Missouri has not had horrendous injury luck under this staff, they've routinely beaten teams at the bottom of the league. They have beaten teams that, like Ole Miss, Mississippi State now, they are beating teams in the middle of the standings. They've shown you that when they're healthy and they've got a roster that's at mostly full capacity, they can be in that top, probably 6?
Yeah.
That this is the time when you can really begin to shift the narrative around, is this, maybe Missouri's not a top 4 team perception in terms of perception this year, but the bigger thing for me is next year when it's looking like they're going to have a lot of retention and they can go into the portal. These are the kinds of outcomes that people remember the next year when they're beginning to sort of set expectations. And so even if in the short term it doesn't completely radically shift how people talk about Missouri, the next month or so begins to shift how people talk about the program going into next year. And it begins to shift how this staff can talk about the program when they go out in May, in July, when they have to see kids on the trail. So it's big in terms of, even if I don't hear like Norlander and Parrish talking about Missouri for 15 minutes on a pod, or Field of 68 doesn't dedicate, what's going to matter is in the next month or so, and you talk about accomplishing what they want to accomplish, there's the stuff on the floor, but if they come out of a month from now and they've had a Sweet 16 run and they finished in the top 4, that's going to be the kind of thing that really shifts the conversation. And that starts tomorrow. So I'm not really worried about what the coverage is going to look like in the aftermath. I'm worried about this being the start of Missouri beginning to change the long-term conversation around what the program's doing. And for the love of God, we can stop mentioning 0-18 every time they take the floor. I'm really tired of the 0-18 graphics, guys. We get it. They didn't win a game last year. You don't need to keep referencing it.
Yeah,
we're all aware of what happened. It's not new. It's not insightful. We're aware of what happened.
It's a fresh memory for a lot of people.
It's not like it happened in 1906 or something. It happened 10 months ago. So we don't need the constant graphics. But then they get to go to Arkansas, which
a trip to Arkansas. Hogs are 4-3 in their last 7.
Yeah, so they're looking
not bad. They squeaked out a win over Georgia. They really should not have lost to Oklahoma. That was bad.
No,
but good. Really, what set them on the path was the win at Kentucky. His team went in. They shot the ball great, which we know shot variance. This is not a great 3-point shooting team, but when you shoot the ball great,
a lot of people shoot the ball well against Kentucky, though.
That is true. Kentucky not super known for their sterling defense just yet. But then they did go on the road and beat a tough Texas team. Texas is kind of hit or miss sometimes, but they're still a tough, talented team. Lost a close one to Alabama, beat LSU, and then and another tough road game at A&M.
Yeah.
They do have Auburn on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So while we're playing Alabama, they're playing Auburn, and then we match up in Fayetteville next Saturday. So Arkansas is playing better. This is a game I felt when they were coming into Mizzou Arena mid-January. I thought this was a game Missouri was going to win, potentially win convincingly. They did that. It was what did we say the opening run was? I have to look this up.
Yeah, we got to look it up here. It was
an 18-0 run.
Yeah, out of the gate.
It was 18. So it was 18-2 because Arkansas scored the first basket to start the game. Look, like
it was done after 5 minutes.
Yeah. And everybody kind of knew it was done. Arkansas had some moments where they kind of fought back a little bit. Missouri was able to sort of keep them at arm's length. It was, it ended up being an 18-point win. That was the run. They are a different team. They're a better team, and I think this is going to be a much tougher game. Obviously, you're on the road. I still think it's a game that Missouri should win.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious to see what happens with Arkansas and Alabama. Like if that kind of knocks them back a little bit, or if they're able to be competitive and make Auburn sweat.
Yeah, I think we talked about it before we came on, and just sort of I think trying to confirm what we see, which is this Arkansas team losing Boogie Fland objectively is bad because he's a good basketball player and he can create offense for himself. And this was an Arkansas team where schematically you could have the criticism that Cal's a little stale, but I think it had gotten to the point where it was like, okay, it's Boogie Fland as primary, secondary, and then, oh God, we're in late clock. Let's see what happens. It had really become, we need Boogie to drive everything for us. And I think it had pushed Nelly Davis into a position where he's not a straight wing. Nelly Davis is a combo guard that you can, have do a little bit creating for you, but he can score at all three levels, but he kind of needs the ball in his hand in secondary actions. And he wasn't getting that with Boogie on the floor because they were trying to play DJ and it just didn't work. You take Boogie out of the mix. DJ is now more just kind of come down, initiate, move the ball around. You can get to Nelly, who can score it at all three levels and do it efficiently. He's not a guy who lives in mid-range pull-ups like Boogie does. So you're getting some rim attempts, you're getting some catch and shoots. And it's let them get a guy like Billy Richmond on the floor, who I think, needs some development offensively in terms of skill, but the kid runs his ass off in transition. He guards really hard. He's athletic as an off-ball defender and rim protector, which they need extra help for because they don't have a lot of bigs. And then they've I think they're still trying to figure out how they want to use Z and Adu together, but you can get, if you need a defensive big, put Jonas in. If you need a guy who you want to pick and pop and have some offensive pop, put Z in. And so I think we were saying that, are they perfect? Are they sorted out the flaws? No. But they have clear roles. They've got a hierarchy. And they're getting a guy, I think, in Nelly Davis, who, as a college player, is more fully formed than what Boogie Fland is. Boogie Fland's going to be a draft pick because you bet on guys who can create for themselves the way he can. But at the college level, a guy like Janelle Davis is really, really valuable because of what he can do at all three levels. I think it's given them a little bit more of a hierarchy, and they're playing better as a result of that. And I do agree that going in and getting an FU win in Lexington reset the things for them. They could now come out of that and say, okay, we put a middle finger up to everybody who is waiting for us to fail. Let's go try and salvage this. I don't know if they'll get it done because I don't know if they have the depth and kind of the pieces they need, but they're certainly playing differently. To bring it back to what you said, I don't think this is going to be a team that you're going to pop an 18-0 run off of. I think they've got enough pride and enough structure now to where they can punch back a little bit. So that's what's going to be interesting is, do they take what happened in Columbia and use that as motivation in a way that's really, really productive? If they have and they're locked in, I think this is a game that could get really, really tricky for Missouri, because I think Arkansas is playing with enough motivation. They've got the coherence they lacked, and it's tough to play in BWA. It's tough to play there. So that it'll be a trickier matchup than what we saw last time.
I agree. I think with that, we're going to get out of here.
Woohoo! We potted.
Anything else? Anything else you want to hit on before we check out?
No. It's a fun time. It's weird to have a team locked in with 5 weeks until the bracket's done. We haven't had that in 12 years, so I don't know what I'm going to do with all this time. Normally, this is when I'm like trying to figure out why Missouri is where it is in the PMs. Now I just have to be like, all right, let's just let Watkins do all the work and figure out what the seed line is. And I'll just keep cutting film.
I'm here for Missouri's continued run of beating their expected margin. I think I noted that they've done that in all but 2 SEC games, and they beat the margin, right?
Yeah, they did not beat the margin against Texas, and they did not beat the margin against A&M.
Correct. Yeah. So if Missouri is able to beat the margin in every remaining game, they will win the rest of their games. They are projected per KenPom to win each remaining game. Now that's an individual game's expected results. So there are single possession games in there. The end result becomes 12-6. I'd be happy with 12-6, but I think this is a team that really should be 13-5. Like I can see a hiccup in one of those games. I think, Vandy, Arkansas on the road, Kentucky or Alabama at home. Yeah, like there's 4 games that I think that you could reasonably lose. 2-2, I'll be fine, but let's just go for it. Let's just win them all, Matt. I mean, who knows? The top 10 in KenPom is not out of the question at this point. So we're going to get out of here. We'll be back next week to talk about Alabama and Arkansas, see what happens. Hopefully the guys play well. And then we'll do some previewing of South Carolina, Vanderbilt. We're
going to preview South Carolina.
It's going to be a light week. We're going to talk about them.
The big storyline there is, can Jordan Butler get his first SEC win?
Oh,
who's to say?
Poor Jordan. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next week. See you on the Rock On Plus forums. If you're not there, get on there. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.